So, welcome to our first special topics episode for the Playing with Research and Health and PE podcast. These are a bit more free flowing and not specific to one paper per se. And this one resulted in the extra conversation we had with Dr. Justen O'Connor and Dillon Landi from episode 5, which covered informal sport. And we go more into youth sports in general here as well. And there was just too much good stuff being discussed in this paper, and we kept carrying on with our conversation and the other tangents from his original paper that he co-authored. Then I successfully crashed my audio in the middle of it, so Dillon and Justen just keep talking, and if there was a video of it, it would be me waving around saying I can't hear anything. But there's also a few spots in there that kind of switch from one specific topic to another because of that. But I also think there are some gems in there about informal sport, culture, capitalism, and Afghani women bicycle groups. So here we go. First special topics episode with Dillon, Justen, and Risto. You hit on, like, this really resonated with me, and you hit on a lot of points that I think are on the cusp coming here as well, especially urban, very densely populated neighborhoods. And the community groups that I've worked with, they don't have the money to pay it's about similar pay. It's about $450 for soccer,
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
I was at Fullerton. So
And there's a reason why it's expensive, but at the same time, these clubs say, well, we've asked them, how come you don't, bring in disabled kids, or you don't bring, it's just because they're all volunteers. They haven't got the time, the energy, to make new teams and to foster it. They like the idea, but they're just too busy, and they don't have the resources or the willpower. And if they've got enough teams, they've got enough teams. And it just seems to be like some of those clubs, just instead of having to deal with taking on more people, they just put the price up just to make life easier. So they're almost professionalizing junior sport in a way. Everything gets outsourced now. So they're paying full-time people to manage the books, whereas previously it was a volunteer that was doing it. So formal sport is becoming increasingly less accessible, whilst informal participation is becoming far more comfortable. I think it's easier to engage with a group of like-minded peers and just organise an informal whatever and make it regular than I think it is to commit to a full season of competition with all of its focus on performance and fitness and skill and outcomes.
you're spot on with that. I look at the way most U.S. schools and middle school and high school, and I'm not saying everyone, but a lot of it is sport based. It's learning the tactical approach to it, or playing games. And when you look at what even our college students on campus here do for physical activity, they do things that they can do by themselves, that they can fit into very specific corners of their schedule on the weekends, or they go to the gym. And intramural leagues aren't as popular as they used to be for students to play, because you have to figure out 11 other people to go at the same time, and double that amount to have a competitive outdoor soccer game. And it's just not it's not functional when
If
you
think about,
end up having a family or a baby or traffic or whatever that is.
and just look at the sports that are in decline. The ones that take 4 hours, they're gone. Like baseball, I imagine in the US is really struggling at the moment. I would be surprised if as a adult participation in traditional baseball would be quite would be going down, I would imagine. I would be thinking that things like golf, where it takes 4 hours to play a round, are now not as popular as they used to be.
Also money.
Sorry?
Also money, access to the golf
Yes,
course
true.
itself.
Yeah. And you know, athletics, where you wait around for a day to do two events. They're just they're so structured and rigid that they just don't fit this modern lifestyle. You know, people want to squeeze it in at 5:30 in the morning, and they don't want it to be stupidly complex.
Right. And I think Dillon can also speak to this. Both of us wrestled in high school and college, and those tournaments are, you get there Friday at 2-3 p.m. if not earlier. You leave at 11 p.m. and you come back the next morning at 6 or 7 in the morning, and you leave at 9 p.m. I have really good friends of mine that were collegiate wrestlers, and they don't want their kids to go into wrestling because that kills the whole entire weekend. Whereas you could go into a soccer game and it's done during the weekend. So even sports specific, I can't imagine what cricket is like in Australia.
Well, cricket has been forced to change. So now they've gone from 4 or 5 day test matches to 20 games, and they're now talking, I think they're going to push down to 10 overs. So they've realised that they're under the pump and their game was going to die. So they've managed to adapt and adjust their sport. And so I think that will help them because they're a big sport, and so they throw money at and their resources at. And because they're a television sport, they'll continue to be able to throw those resources in, and they'll offer their programs in schools, and they'll grab enough kids to get interested in becoming cricketers. But I think those marginal sports that don't have that capacity will certainly be squeezed and pushed, and will slowly, if we're losing 15% of our adult participation in the next 15 years, it's going to put a lot of pressure on a lot of different sports. And the ones that most people are heading towards are low organisation, low kind of skill. So think jogging groups, running groups. Like I mentioned, the half marathon participation, staggering increase in the number of people doing that. Things like I live on a bay, and bay swimming is hugely popular now. So people just all year round, winter, doesn't matter what, they just go out and they do their morning swim. I was in Perth the other day, and we pulled up at an oval, and there was a bunch of taxis all lined up, and they were in the middle of the oval, which was actually a soccer pitch. They were playing a full game of cricket. Like, it was about 6 aside, and they'd organised themselves to play on a Thursday night, rock up when you finish your shift, turn up and play. They just randomly allocated people to teams, and they didn't care about technique or tactics. They were just slogging it. They wanted to see how many sixes they could hit. And they were having a great time. And I asked the guy there, do you do this often? He says, yeah, every week, different people every week, but it's on. And people will just turn up and play, and then we'll all head off when we need to. And that's kind of, I think that's the future. I think that's where sport is heading. Can see it a lot.
It also tells you the importance of the affective domain in all of this.
Oh, absolutely.
Because traditionally, right, we've kind of sort of, as a field, I say we as a field, we've had this idea that our goal is to make skilled performers,
yes,
or like tacticians, or even like, as I think Kirk called it, mini scientists at one point. And that's actually not what it's about. It's about, enjoying what you're doing, having social connections with others, and being able to essentially connect with others through movement rather than movement and structuring your connection.
Yes, and it gives, so the movement, the activity, I think is kind of irrelevant, but the activity gives us an excuse to meet up with someone. It gives us an excuse to come together as a group and do something other than work. So it doesn't, like, I was reading a paper recently on walking groups in Scotland, I think it was, and they found that the movement itself, so walking forwards in a movement, enabled people to have conversations they couldn't have if they were sitting opposite someone looking them in the eye. So, and they found they opened up a lot more and were able to talk a lot more about different stuff they probably wouldn't say if they were in a face-to-face situation having a serious sit-down kind of chat. And so these informal spaces allow people to converse and confess and to talk and to, communicate about stuff that they probably wouldn't have a chance to do otherwise. And I think we've grossly underestimated the social context of participation. And I think knowing what we know now through even the brain research, which is telling us about loneliness and loneliness being an innate drive that comes from the savannah plain when we're evolving, and the same as hunger, the same as fear. When we're lonely, we produce cortisol, we get stressed, we have anxiety, we feel terrible, we get ill, we have high rates of cancer, etc. And we're compelled to want to join the social herd. And if through activity we can join the social herd and become on the inside of the social group, then that makes us feel so much better about ourselves and our connection to the world and our existence. And I don't think we can underestimate some of that stuff.
Which comes back to the policy piece, right? So, I think Oliver and Kirk always cite Siedentop's 96 article, how we tend to, in physical education, focus on individual development, individual progress, goal setting, and things like that. But actually, if we want physical education to make an actual difference, it needs to focus on social goals and social progress, and setting up an environment that is, we don't want to say welcoming for all, but allows people different opportunities rather than the only opportunity.
Yes. Yeah. And the more I look at this, the more I don't think, sport has been, through policy, has been asked to be everything for everyone. So everyone so you can't say no to anyone on anything. And what that ends up is people kind of resent that in the end, because they like being like, I know a group of Afghani women cyclists who go out and ride as a bunch of Afghani women, and they don't really want white men to come into their group and stir things up, if that makes sense. So they're being exclusionary, but I think that that group is far more functional if they remain relatively exclusionary and similar. So it may be that trying to force everybody into a one-size-fits-all sporting model is actually detrimental to the idea of engaging groups of people in physical activity, and to allow groups to mingle but not necessarily force them into all be everything for everyone. I think that might be one way you can get inclusion within sport without having to have everyone be the same. I don't know if that makes sense.
It makes complete sense to me.
So how does this then, because right, PE isn't all sport, but there's a lot of sport in physical education. So where do we go or where do you suggest that physical education kind of morphs into to have this more, informal, or preparing our students to be more informal sport participants when they graduate?
So Dawn Penny and I are just writing a paper on that right now. I've got to talk to her this Savo. So we're writing a paper where we've done an analysis of the curriculum. So we've looked at all the aspects of curriculum. This is Australian curriculum, where we see skills, knowledge, and understanding that links to the kinds of things we're seeing in informal sport. And then we've done a map of informal sport based on our own participation, but also what we're reading from other sources. We've looked at the key skills, knowledge, and understanding we think are important in that. And we're now going to put those two together to say, you don't have to change, you don't need a new curriculum. The curriculum well and truly accounts for this. And even things that sit in curriculum like, general capabilities, those soft skills that sit across curriculum, so that students will learn teamwork and leadership and all those other things they throw in curriculum documents that don't sit in any unit but operate across curriculum. We think PE's got a really big role to play there. And we put those two together and we say, we'll end up saying we don't need to change curriculum. We don't need to drastically rethink the whole phys ed program. But what you can do is enable young people to start to practice these key knowledge, skills, and understandings by setting up and operating their own informal forms of participation within the context of their school grounds. Yes.
We're kind of stuck in our, I don't want to say the old ways, but like we're not moving on from sport like competition yet. And we need to see what's relevant within the culture and respond to it. And if informal physical activity is what's relevant, then we have to develop skills that do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And you think of all the talk around, employability, what makes someone employable, then, maths isn't going to be the place where you learn how to get along with others and form social relationships in a workplace. Nor is probably English, because they're too busy testing them every 5 weeks to see what their literacy levels are like. So, that space in the curriculum, I think we can start to really carve out as let's produce really strong citizens that engage in whatever activity. As I think the activity is the least important of the things, but let's get them working in groups to support, to engage and to support and to foster. And yes, it won't be perfect, and not every group should be the same, and not everyone should be in every group. But I think if we start to think about being able to accommodate difference, in that I know how to manipulate, modify, change the task, the environment, the constraints to fit a range of people. I might not necessarily have to participate with all of those people, but there will be a space in there. And at the end, we kind of come back together. So I reckon that's a bit of a skill that's untapped. And one thing we notice about these informal groups is they all require a champion. They need someone to pull it together and to lead it and to make the decisions. And the better that person is at coordinating and helping and supporting and nurturing, the more successful they are. And the more of those people there are, the more likely these groups to become sustainable and ongoing. And that's a kind of a skill set that I think we could push, but then has implications for other areas of the curriculum. So
it's kind of like cultivating physical activity champions or advocates in a way.
Yeah.
Going back to what you said, though, I agree that we could carve out a niche, and I actually think this should be the purpose of physical education, is to carve out that niche. But the U.S. is a very different sociological place, essentially, culturally, than places like Australia and New Zealand. So in the US, there is this push on holding physical educators accountable. And in some places, that means fitness testing the students before and after, or, doing skills tests before and after. So how do you sort of like push up against that with saying, no, that isn't our goal?
So that's a tricky one, but I still think we can assess this stuff. Like we can assess, like what I would do for assessment in group work is I would have the students show growth. So you got to demonstrate how you've grown. So you might list down, I reckon there's probably 15, 20 different sort of skills, knowledge and understandings you could relate to this kind of context. Some of it will be about skill, because some kids want to improve their skills. They want to get better at whatever the activity is. Some of it will be about fitness, because they want to improve their capacity to undertake this activity. Some of it will be about communication, and some of it will be about sort of goal setting. Some of it will be about motivation. But I think you could assess all of that if you think if you enable young people to negotiate that assessment task. So what do I want to show you at the end of 6 weeks? What am I going to convince you that I've learned at the end of 6 weeks? So you put this kind of negotiated contract in place. I will learn, to do X. This is what I know now about teamwork and group work. And I'm going to document my progression over this 8-week unit. I'm going to show you what I now know about teamwork and group work at the end. And I'm going to evidence that with some video at the start of where, I've looked at my practice in group work and I found I interject too much and I talk over people. By the end of it, you can see now in this video that I'm no longer talking over people and interjecting, but I'm allowing them to have their voice, and then entering a response. So that might be the growth over the 8 weeks. So from an assessment point of view, it's just about thinking differently about what evidence are we going to use to show change in behavior across a period of time. And some of those successes will be measured by how many people choose to engage in your activity. You know, if you have because we think one of the ways to do this is to start off with small groups devising a plan for a physical activity, and then letting the groups decide which ones are going to get up based on, you know, and then so people will vote with their feet. Like the best form of one of the great forms of resistance to power is to not engage, to withdraw your engagement. So, you know, what groups are able to build and sustain and maintain, and what can we learn from those, and how do we evidence that? And that's an example of assessment. So I just think we think differently about assessment and allow negotiation in that assessment, and allow young people to take some responsibility. Then you can probably build accountability into that.
Which also leads back to the whole notion of, if they're going to be, I don't want to say accountable, but if they're going to be game changers, if they're going to be advocates, if they're going to be the superheroes for their own communities, then they have to create these things anyway. So this is just a skill that they're developing to do that.
That's right. So they're practicing that skill, you know, and I think it's got to be practice. It's not, you know, not all planning. So they need. I quite like John Key's take on games making.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of model where because he builds personal social responsibility into that.
Yeah.
I like that as a framework. It's a kind of a framework that I think you could hang this off. So, you know, rather than making a game with these pieces of equipment and this fundamental motor skill, you say, right, here is, and I'd probably use a scaffolded example, build that scaffolded example, and then you introduce the key kind of skills, knowledge, and understandings they need to be able to do this, get them to select 3 they want to focus on, they put that into their portfolio, they do a pre-assessment, they engage in the activity, they collect evidence over that time, put that evidence in their portfolio. At the end of it, they showcase how they've grown in that space. It's kind of, I don't think it's tricky to think about, but I don't think it's impossible or that hard that we can't do it.
Something that I noticed through this was like the form of capitalism and how that has structured particular like communities and like, you know, this formalized setting through capitalism. In other words, like we have to breed these players, you know, we have to make money off of these fields, we have to do this. I find that like a lot of times we don't want to call out capitalism. Do you think that has a role to play with this as well, policy wise? Like,
absolutely. Yeah, if you think of the reason why Australia set up the Australian Sports Commission in the first place, it was to win Olympic medals, to make us, you know, look good on the world stage. And it wasn't, you know, there's an argument there that formal sport is so important to physical activity and health and well-being, but I would argue that people coming together in social connection to engage in healthy activity is what's most important, and that doesn't necessarily require a gold medal at the end of it. You know, I think their sporting structures are set up for revenue generation. Definitely one of the trends that's going to happen is the big sports, the ones that have access to TV rights and can sell their product to huge audiences, will continue to be big, and they will probably get bigger. And the smaller sports will get squeezed out of that space as the market constricts. And so fewer bigger sports will become stronger and bigger, while marginal sports will get squished and be pushed to the limits and margins. But I think what will happen out of that is people will self-organize themselves into various forms of participation that are not so technically focused or tactically, you know, require huge amounts of tactical skill or exorbitant amounts of fitness, and they will just participate. And you know, I see that in cycling bunches. You've got super fast bunches flying along, you've got middle bunches, and you've got people who are just out for a little cruise and they want to have friendship and they go to the coffee shop. And you know, that sort of stuff is replicating itself across running groups, across swimming groups, across you know, a whole host of areas. And I think that's a pushback or a resistance, a form of resistance to this kind of highly corporatized, structured sporting model that we've ended up with.
Justen, thank you so much for taking the time out to hang out with us. I know Risto's going to follow up with you about the socio-ecological paper.
Yeah.
And then when the other paper comes out, if you don't mind, you'll probably tweet it. But also, sending it through, so we can jump up on that as well.
No problem.
Oh, cool.
Awesome.
Anything else that you want me to tell Risto, who is
No, just
away
thank
in
you
the
for the
silence there?
opportunity, and yeah, thanks for letting me share.
Thanks so much, Justin.
No worries.
Have a good day.
You too.
Cheers.
Cheers.